Hi, my name is Hailey Frechette, and my presentation is on how fantasy books act as a mirror for environmental awareness. The big guiding idea for this project is that the worlds within fantasy books are not just escapist, they reflect real ecological issues like pollution, extinction, exploitation, and restoration. I'm going to walk you through a few features that can support this. Thank you. Fantasy doesn't just escape the world, it re-enchants it. When we imagine fantasy, we see glowing forests, kingdoms swallowed by drought, and seas that remember the dead. These settings resonate because they feel alive, not just magical, but ecological. They breathe, grow, and react the way real environments do. Beneath all the enchantment sits a grounded question: how do people live within their environment, and what happens when that balance breaks? Fantasy worlds pull us in because they amplify the very tensions our own world is facing. According to literary scholar Nicola Alter, setting isn't just a backdrop, it's the soul of the story. It includes everything that creates a sense of place: weather, culture, history, and mood. Wolfgang Iser adds the idea of repertoire, the memories and knowledge readers bring with them. That's why poisoned rivers or blighted forests in a novel feel instantly familiar. We may not recognize the magic system, but we recognize the emotional meaning behind environmental damage. Fantasy feels close to home because symbolically, it is. Powell Anderson makes a similar point in Nature, Laws, and Surprises, arguing that geography shapes behavior, belief, and survival. Mountains breed isolation, deserts demand adaptation, and fertile valleys invite both comfort and conflict. In fantasy, as in reality, the land acts as a character. Tolkien describes fantasy as the escape of the prisoner, not the flight of the deserter, meaning we enter imaginary worlds to see truth more clearly, not avoid it. So even when fantasy stories seem impossible, they're often about deeply real things: fragile life, interdependence, and the consequences of losing ecological balance. Ultimately, fantasy doesn't run from reality, it reframes it. The worlds we read about become mirrors, showing us how tightly life, land, and survival are connected. When forests dim, when magic fades, and when storms fall out of rhythm, those moments echo real ecological imbalance, and if magic itself can die when nature is forgotten, fantasy suggests a quiet warning for our own world. The health of any society depends on the health of the environment that sustains it. In every world, there are species that hold the balance and those that break it. In creatures, people, and ecosystems, I want to focus on the living forces that shape fantasy worlds. These include dragons, fae, spirits, humans, and much more. These beings function like ecological forces, influencing the health of their environments in the same way that real species do. Some act as keystone species, holding entire ecosystems together through their presence and power. Others behave more like invasive species, spreading corruption or imbalance that destabilizes everything around them. And in many stories, the disappearance of magical creatures mirrors extinction, showing how wonder and stability vanish together. Finally, humans often become ecological catalysts, capable of either devastating their world or beginning its restoration. These four lenses reveal how fantasy uses its creatures to explore the delicate balance of real ecosystems. Keystone species in fantasy. In ecology, a keystone species is one that holds an entire system together. Remove it, and everything begins to unravel. Fantasy mirrors this idea beautifully. In Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, dragons act as the engines of both climate and magic, and their bond with riders is a form of symbiosis rather than dominance. When that bond breaks, storms destabilize, magic fractures, and the world edges toward collapse. In A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, the Fae courts reflect the natural rhythm of the seasons, and when the blight disrupts those cycles, the land itself falls out of balance. Feyre's awakening, seeing the forest as living and sacred, mirrors a human reconnection with nature. Together, dragons and fae function like wolves, coral reefs, or pollinators in real ecosystems. Small shifts in their presence create massive shifts in the world around them. Invasive magic and corruption. In the real world, invasive species spread quickly in disturbed environments and outcompete native life. And fantasy uses that same logic to portray magical corruption. In Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros, the venom drain the land of magic, city by city, leaving behind dull skies, fading storms, and soil turned gray. They operate like an extreme form of resource extraction, consuming everything in their path. In Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, the Valg function as an invasive species on a planetary scale. Wherever they spread, forests rot, rivers sour, and even the rules of magic are rewritten. Together, these stories show how invasive magic becomes a metaphor for pollution, colonization, and the destructive power of forces that erase native systems and throw entire worlds out of balance. Extinction and the loss of wonder. In fantasy, extinction often reveals more than the disappearance of a species. It shows what happens when wonder itself is destroyed. In Aragon by Christopher Poloni, dragons are wiped out not by natural forces, but by human fear and the urge to control what they don't understand. Their extinction leaves Iglesia feeling morally hollow and energetically drained. In A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. Martin, dragons die not of age, but in captivity, and when they disappear, the entire climate shifts. Summers shorten, winters deepen, and magic thins from the world. Both stories frame extinction as the loss of awe, balance, and vitality, the inevitable outcome when something powerful and sacred is treated like a resource to own rather than a presence to respect. Humanity as ecological catalyst. In Dune, Frank Herbert shows how humans become the most volatile force in any ecosystem. The spice is both lifeblood and addiction, a perfect parallel to fossil fuels. And while empires view Arrakis as something to mine and control, the Fremen see it as a relationship built on balance and respect. The sandworms function like nature's immune system, enforcing limits on exploitation and reminding us that no environment can be pushed past its breaking point without consequences. Herbert captures a beautiful truth. Humans are the only species that can poison a river, then mourn it. Fantasy magnifies that paradox, revealing how deeply we're capable of both ruin and restoration depending on the choices we make. When magic becomes a resource, even wonder can be strip-mined. In this feature, I look at what happens when fantasy worlds treat magic the way we treat oil, gas, or even tech data. To mirror how we talk about real environmental crises, I present this section through fake news articles, broadcasts, and case files, formats that highlight how normalized exploitation can become. This feature will follow 4 major threads: magic as a form of resource extraction, industrialization and pollution, war over resources, and full-scale ecological collapse. Together, these show how quickly wonder decays when power is commodified, and how deeply fantasy reflects the destructive patterns of our own world. Magic as resource extraction. In Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, Manathian appears at first glance to be a clean, modern metropolis powered by light, but that light is really magic that's been refined, regulated, and tightly controlled. It's converted into electricity, weapons, and infrastructure, all under the guise of efficiency and safety. But beneath that polished exterior, the consequences are clear. Rivers are polluted, citizens are getting sick, and every drop of power funnels upward to those who control the system. Bryce's rediscovery of raw, unrefined light becomes a reclamation of agency, a reminder that magic was never meant to be a commodity. In her hands, power shifts from something exploited to something sacred. Industrialization and pollution. In Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, the Rid Keys operate like a hyper-destructive form of industrial technology. Every time they're used, they tear holes between realms, the skies split open, and the seas scream. Ley lines rupture under the strain. Although rulers insist they're harnessing the keys for protection or order, every attempt at control only accelerates the world's collapse. It's a sharp mirror for our own history: nuclear testing, deep drilling, and reckless technological expansion pursued in the name of progress, while the environment bears the cost. The Rid Keys show how easily innovation turns toxic when it ignores the limits of the natural world. War over resources. In The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen, the conflict centers on the bridge, the only safe route for transporting trade, food, and, most importantly, water. Each side tells a different version of the truth. The surrounding nations view Ithacana as hoarding vital resources, while Ithacana sees itself as protecting balance and preventing exploitation. Lara's journey captures this tension perfectly. Raised to believe Ithacana is the enemy, she slowly realizes they are actually stewards safeguarding what the world depends on. The story reveals how easily survival can be twisted into justification for conquest, and how wars over resources often stem from fear, scarcity, and misrepresentation rather than true villainy. The World in Collapse. In City of Gods and Monsters by Kayla Edwards, the Arcanum Well is designed to harness divine energy, but instead it detonates, destroying an entire city, tearing open the veil between realms, and triggering a literal reset of reality. The disaster becomes a powerful metaphor for human overreach, the belief that we can replicate or improve on creation without facing consequences. The collapse of Angelthine mirrors our own world's warning signs: ecosystems pushed beyond recovery, oceans warming, and species disappearing, and air thickening under the weight of ambition. It's a reminder that when societies stretch natural and spiritual systems past their limits, collapse becomes inevitable. After the blight, there is always a bloom. This feature shifts the focus from collapse to healing, from what destroys fantasy worlds to what allows them to recover. At its core is a simple question: what does it look like when worlds mend, and who allows this to occur? Across these stories, restoration is never accidental or effortless. It is driven by characters who heal the land as much as themselves, cultures that learn to live with the world instead of against it, and magic systems that depend on balance rather than domination. Through 4 lenses: the healing heroine, harmony versus hubris, elemental equilibrium, and rebirth and renewal, this section explores how fantasy imagines recovery as an act of stewardship, empathy, and rebalance. These narratives remind us that even in the aftermath of ruin, life pushes towards the light. The Healing Heroine. In Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo, the Shadow Fold functions like an ecological wound carved across Ravka, a scar created by magic twisted beyond its limits. Alina's power isn't just a weapon, her light is restorative, a force meant to heal what has been corrupted. And From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout, the Ascended drain the land like parasites, leaving entire regions barren and silent. When Poppy's true nature awakens, her magic brings life back into places long stripped of it. In both stories, restoration isn't a side effect, it's the heart of the hero's journey. These protagonists don't just defeat darkness, they mend what darkness damaged, showing that in many fantasy worlds, the truest form of heroism is ecological healing. Harmony versus hubris. In The Wolf King by Laura Malfrayman, the wolf realm thrives on instinctive seasonal balance. Packs move with the land, not against it. Humans are the one who disrupt that natural rhythm through control, captivity, and exploitation. Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber explores a similar idea through magic. The fates operate by ancient rules meant to preserve equilibrium, but humans treat magic as a shortcut to desire, fracturing the system with every bargain they break. Both stories reveal the same truth. Harmony isn't a passive state, but an ongoing practice of compromise. Hubris, the belief that we can bend nature or magic to our will without consequence, is what breaks that balance. Elemental equilibrium. In the Artifacts of Orano series by Madeline Rue, the ancient artifacts work like regulators of elemental forces, maintaining the balance between wind, fire, water, and earth. Any attempt to control or misuse them sends the world into turmoil, triggering storms, droughts, and climate instability. Lightlark by Alex Astor builds on the same idea. Each realm is tied to a specific element, and the infamous curses exist as consequences for breaking natural agreements. When leaders manipulate or exploit their elemental magic, the land weakens with them. Both stories reflect how real-world climate systems, where oceans, forests, atmosphere, and temperature are interconnected. Disturb one, and the entire system reacts. Fantasy makes this interdependence visible and vividly dangerous. Rebirth and renewal. In A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, Prithian's recovery after the war isn't instant or magical, it's gradual. Forests grow back, rivers run clean again, and seasonal magic returns only as the courts rebuild trust, community, and connection. The land heals in tandem with its people. The Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy explores renewal on an even more intimate level. Under Midas, everything withers, the land, the magic, and even Orin herself. His power drains vitality the way exploitation drains an ecosystem, but once Orin breaks free, her true magic emerges as regenerative instead of consumptive, restoring what he stripped away. Both stories show that rebirth is never just environmental. It's tied to liberation, healing, and rediscovering self-worth. Renewal becomes both ecological and emotional. Fantasy worlds show us poisoned rivers, hollowed kingdoms, and skies on the brink of breaking, but they also show us forests growing back, magic returning, and bonds being repaired. These worlds do not promise easy fixes. Instead, they give us metaphors for what's already happening around us. Rewilding projects, coral nurseries, dam removals, seed banks, all restoration efforts built slowly and deliberately. Eco-fantasy becomes a way to think about our own future, not in abstractions, but in images we understand. And the core idea, one that should be said slowly, is this. Eco-fantasy doesn't just ask, what if the world ended? It asks, what if we cared enough that it didn't? Fantasy reminds us that balance isn't static, it's alive. It has to be chosen, protected, and rebuilt. These worlds let us see what balance could look like so that when we recognize it in our own world, we know it's worth fighting for.